To set the discussion up, at least in a simple way, about why there's an issue about antitrust application to technology at all, we'll put up some basic market share numbers. So things like for search and for online sales. And you'll see in most of these markets, depending on how they're defined, there's some pretty large market shares. But Google and Apple have 95% of app spending. Facebook and Google have 60% of digital advertising, and so it goes. So in looking at those numbers, the regular person out on the street says, why aren't the antitrust enforcers doing something about this?
So that's a good question, and it actually gets to a basic point about antitrust law, which I think is really important for people to understand. The antitrust laws don't punish companies just for being big. So when companies have big market shares, that's really important. That's something that matters to us. That's often a springboard for antitrust enforcement. But it's important to remember that a company could have a big market share simply because it does what it does better than anybody else. So our job is to try to figure out, is a company big, successful, does it have a large share because it's good at what it does, or is it doing something improper, something that is anti-competitive, that harms competition, and because of that, it's big and successful?
So we talked with Paul Romer, the Nobel Prize winner in economics, just this morning, actually, about this subject. And this is what he had to say, suggesting maybe the antitrust laws are not the right way to go at some of the issues that we're facing. This is what he said.
It goes beyond our traditional economic concerns. I mean, one of the questions we should be asking is whether Mark Zuckerberg personally can determine the outcome of the next election.
So whether or not Mark Zuckerberg can, in fact, determine the outcome of the next election, certainly he'll have some influence over it. That really is outside of what your job is, isn't it?
It is. So look, it's important also to understand that antitrust law enforcement is law enforcement. So we look at a set of specific laws, we in the Department of Justice, and we enforce those laws. Those laws tell us to protect competition. So what we look for is conduct that's anti-competitive, mergers that harm competition. We're not price regulators, we're not speech regulators, we don't regulate content. We look for competition law issues and we enforce the law on competition.
At the same time, you yourself have set up a task force, a specific technology task force, to take a look at what's going on in the intersection between antitrust law and technology. And the FTC overall has been having a series of hearings now for some time. I think the last one's coming up in a couple of days. So there must be some reason for you to ask the question, does our traditional approach to antitrust law really apply in a world driven by, for example, network effects that may really have different effects in the marketplace?
Well, absolutely. But let me give you a little historical context here. So network effects were a huge issue in the late 1990s, and you may remember with the whole dot-com bubble, there was a tremendous amount of furor in the antitrust space where people were saying, hey, we have big network effects in these industries. Does that mean we should rethink what we do? And the same was, by the way, true when telecommunications started becoming deregulated, even with railroads, if you go all the way back to kind of the beginning of the Sherman Act. So one of the things that antitrust has a century-long history of doing is taking these broad commands that we have in the antitrust laws, taking the most recent thinking in economics, taking the most recent developments in technologies and facts, and putting those together to figure out, well, how do we protect competition given these new facts? So we have hearings that are, as you said, concluding this week. We have a task force in this space. But this is not unprecedented. There were hearings done under Chairman Potofsky at the Federal Trade Commission in the 1990s for much the same reason, to try to figure out, given all this new development, both in technology and economics, what should we be looking for and how should we be looking? When I was at the Federal Trade Commission the last time around in the early 2000s, we did a similar exercise with hospital mergers. The government had lost, I think it was something on the order of 11 straight challenges to hospital mergers. We stepped back, we put a project together to review the economics of hospital mergers, to better understand them. We put a task force together to handle that issue, and then ultimately that led to changing the way we thought about those cases, and since then we've won quite a number of challenges to hospital mergers. So this is an ongoing process that we do.